Well, it is a day of grand celebration in the Chinese capital, Beijing. The commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of resistance against the Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War will begin at roughly 10 a.m. Tiananmen Square. You're now looking at a Forbidden City. This is the first time the Forbidden City opened its door to guests from around the world. China will welcome these international friends and dignitaries with its highest honor. It's a perfect day for military parade, I have to admit. China has invited leaders from major countries that have been involved in the Second World War, Asian countries and countries in other parts of the world, as well as international organizations to commemorate with the Chinese people the war anniversary. That is, of course, the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And the purpose is to remember history and martyrs, cherish peace, and create the future.
And now we're looking at live feed from the Duan Gate of the Forbidden City. And foreign dignitaries and heads of international organizations are arriving in their motorcades. Foreign guests present today come from 50 countries. They include 32 heads of state and government leaders, government representatives from 18 countries, and heads of 10 international organizations, as well as 6 former political heavyweights. Ambassadors and envoys to China are also present.
The vehicles carrying foreign guests are now parking at the North Square of Duanmen, the upright gate, which is the southern end of the main entrance to Forbidden City. The guests will walk through the gate to the reception area at the South Square. Where it is situated north of Tiananmen, the Forbidden City is, of course, the imperial palace of 2 consecutive Chinese dynasties from the 14th to the 20th century, the Ming and the Qing dynasties. 24 emperors ever lived in there and ruled from the palace for nearly 600 years. The Forbidden City is considered to be the largest existing Asian wooden structure in the world. Of course, it once housed emperors and empresses. It is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Forbidden City is open to the public after Liberation 1949. Today is the first time that some 30 state heads and government leaders are visiting this palace together. They will be showing up together with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And now guests will be streaming in very soon. Now you're looking at an aerial shot of Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square. Of course, the troops are now ready to march past Tiananmen to be reviewed by Chinese leaders as well as other state leaders for this 70th anniversary.
If you've just joined us, this is our special coverage of the 70th anniversary of the Victory Day of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, as well as the world's anti-fascism war. And CCTV News is going to broadcast live to you throughout the morning in the next 3 hours. Now we are seeing live pictures from the Tiananmen rostrum, and a position on the reviewing stand on the Tiananmen rostrum is considered the highest standard of reception for foreign dignitaries.
Today, China and the rest of the world are joining together to mark the 70th anniversary, to look back at history, of course, most importantly, to look forward to future.
aerial shots of the Forbidden City, and the palace has gone back to going forbidden for this event.
Good morning to you.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife Peng Liyuan are receiving guests, first of his course UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and his wife. But this year marks the UN 70th anniversary. It is the 69th session of the UN General Assembly. A resolution was adopted to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, urging the international community not to forget wartime sacrifices and atrocities.
And walking up next is Secretary General Dmitry Medvedev and his spouse. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a permanent intergovernmental international organization founded in 2001. The SCO pursues its internal policy based on the principles of mutual trust, mutual benefit, equal rights, consultations.
President Peter Murray of International Committee of the Red Cross. Of course, the Red Cross is an independent organization ensuring humanitarian protection and assistance. Well, during the Second World War, the ICRC and A teams consisted of medical workers visited China and provided treatment and help to Chinese civilians.
Director General Li Yong and his spouse. The United Nations Industrial Development Organization is a specialized agency in the United Nations system, headquartered in Vienna, Austria. Its primary objective is the promotion and acceleration of industrial development in developing countries and countries with economies in transition, and the promotion of international industrial cooperation.
The World Health Organization Director General Margaret Chan and her spouse. Well, the WHO was established after the Second World War. Its role is to direct and coordinate international health within the UN system. According to its constitution, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And Margaret Chan from Hong Kong became the head of the organization in 2007.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife are now welcoming guests from other countries and international organizations. Kenneth Clarke, Special Envoy of the Prime Minister and former UK Justice Minister. London is among the most severely bombed cities during World War II. The United Kingdom held nationwide commemoration events marking the 70th anniversary of VJ Day on August 15th, the day when the Japanese Emperor announced the surrender.
And now we have the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization Director General Irina Bokova and her spouse. Well, UNESCO was established in 1945 in order to respond to the belief of nations forged by two world wars in less than a generation that political and economic agreements are not enough to build a lasting peace. Peace must be established on the basis of humanity's moral and intellectual solidarity and be built in minds.
Don McKinnon, Special Envoy of the Prime Minister and former Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, and his spouse. Well, the mainland of New Zealand was not directly involved in World War II, but some 140,000 New Zealanders went to the battlefield, and some 11,000 of them sacrificed their lives in fighting fascists. They made great contribution to the Allied victory.
We have Wong Kan San, Special Envoy of the Government and former Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore. Singapore was occupied by Japan from 1942 to 45. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed by Japanese during the period. And Singapore set February the 15th as the country's Total Defense Day, and commemorations are held every year to mourn the war victims.
Mr. Herman Willink, Special Envoy of the Government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and he is also Minister of State. On May 5th, 1945, the country was liberated by the total surrender of all German forces.
Malaysia, Tan Sri Ong Kah Ching, Special Envoy of the Government, Prime Minister, Special Envoy to China of Malaysia. Malaysia was occupied by Japan. Estimated 100,000 people were killed. This year, on August the 15th, Malaysia started building a tablet commemorating the war crimes.
Mr. V.K. Singh, representative of the government and Minister of State for External Affairs of India. During World War II, intellectuals like Rabindranath Tagore and political leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru closely observed political events in China.
We have Michael Ronaldson, representative of the government and Minister of the Department of Veteran Affairs of Australia. Well, during the Second World War, 1 million Australians served in the armed forces. 40,000 died or wounded. Australia also had commemoration activities in August to mark the 70th anniversary of the war's end.
Mr. Mohammed Duri, representative of the government and foreign minister of Libya. Libya gained its independence in 1951 after the Second World War ended.
We have Paolo Gentiloni, representative of the government and Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy. Italy was involved in the Second World War of the Axis power. The Italian overthrew the Mussolini regime and the Nazi rule. April the 25th is Italy's Liberation Day.
Laurent Fabius, representative of the government and foreign minister of France. France was occupied during the Second World War. Charles de Gaulle led the resistance movement, and in 1944, the country was liberated.
Peter Zijato, representative of the government and foreign minister of Hungary. In March 1944, German forces occupied Hungary. Jews and Roma were deported to the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1945. Hungarian and German forces were defeated by Soviet forces.
Mr. Farhad Hokani, presidential representative and defense minister of Tunisia. Tunisia served as a major battlefield during the war, and in 1943 the country was liberated. Tunisia became an independent nation in 1956.
We have representative from Brazil, Jacques Wagner, presidential representative and defense minister. Brazil was actively involved in the Allied operations, although it is in South America, provided support. It also sent 25,000 troops to Europe. They were called the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, and hundreds of their soldiers died in Europe.
Now we have representative from Indonesia, Puan Maharan, Special Envoy of the Indonesian President, Coordinating Minister for Human Development and Culture. Indonesia was occupied by Japan from 1942 to 1945. China and Indonesia are pushing forward relations as they mark.
We have Mr. Prawit Wongsuwan, Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Thailand. Thailand was invaded by Japan in 1941. Eventually, the nation won its war of resistance. China has a traditional friendship with Thailand, and this year marks the 40 years of diplomatic ties.
Cho Rong-hae, member of the Presidium of the Political Bureau of the Workers' Party of Korea, Central Committee and Secretary of the Central Committee of the WPK of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. During the Second World War, Chinese and Koreans fought together against the Japanese aggression.
We
have Mr. Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez, First Vice President of the State Council and the Council of Ministers, Republic of Cuba, and his spouse. Cuba declared war on the Axis powers in 1941. This year marks the 65th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Cuba. And Cuba will also have its troops in today's parade.
Parliament Speaker Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska of Poland. Poland was the first European country invaded during the Second World War, and Polish people fought hard in their war of resistance.
We have Mr. Amado Boudou, representative of the President, Vice President, and Senate President of Argentina. Well, Argentina declared the war on the Axis powers during the Second World War. Hundreds of volunteers served in the Allied air forces.
This is Mr. Abdelkader Ben Salah, representative of the President and President of the Council of the nation of Algeria. Algeria was invaded during the Second World War, and the Algerian people fought hard to gain independence.
We have Prime Minister Sato Kilman and his spouse from Vanuatu. Vanuatu was used as an important base by the Allies. About 100,000 Allied troops were stationed there in the Second World War, and a delegation from the Vanuatu Mobile Force is joining the parade on Tiananmen Square.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn and his wife. Ethiopia is in Northeast Africa. It was invaded during the Second World War, and Ethiopian people conducted guerrilla warfare to resist aggression. China and Ethiopia are marking 45 years of diplomatic relations this year.
President Trung Tam Sum from Vietnam. Vietnam was invaded by Japan during the Second World War in 1940. But Vietnamese fought hard in the war and won the battles.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Venezuela declared war on the Axis powers in 1945. The relations between China and Venezuela were updated to a comprehensive strategic partnership last year. And today, Venezuelan soldiers are going to march through Tiananmen Square.
Uzbek President Islam Karimov. More than 1 million Uzbeks took part in the Great Patriotic War in the Soviet era. An estimated 400,000 of them died. May the 9th is the country's Victory Day.
President of East Timor, Taumartan Rock, and his wife. East Timor was occupied by Japan during the war. In 2002, it became the first new sovereign state of the 21st century. China was the first country to establish diplomatic ties at the ambassadorial level.
Tajik President Emomali Rahman, Tajikistan contributed about 300,000 soldiers for the Great Patriotic War. An estimated 90,000 of them were killed in the war. And today, the country's armed forces are also in the parade.
Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. This year marks the 65th anniversary of the diplomatic ties between China and Sudan.
South African President Jacob Zuma. Well, South Africa is the second largest economy in Africa, one of the BRIC countries. The 6th ministerial level meeting of China-Africa Cooperation Forum will be held in South Africa at the end of the year.
Serbian President Tomislav Nikolic and his spouse. Yugoslavians conducted a 4-year guerrilla war against fascism, and Serbian troops are also in today's parade.
We have Governor General Michael Oigo and his spouse. Papua New Guinea was occupied by Japan during the war. There is a mausoleum for Chinese soldiers in the country.
Pakistani President Mamnun Hussain and his wife. China and Pakistan have an all-weather strategic partnership of cooperation. The Pakistan Armed Forces are also taking part in today's parade.
Myanmar President U Tin Sen. Myanmar, which is then known as Burma, was occupied by Japan during the war, and China sent expeditionary forces to fight in Burma. And this year marks the 65th year of diplomatic relations between China and Myanmar.
South Korean President Park Geun-hye. During the Second World War, China provided support to the Korean people's resistance against Japanese colonial rule. Korea's provisional government during Japanese colonial rule was located in Shanghai, China.
We have Mongolian President Sakyajin Erbadoji. In 1945, Allied forces of the Soviet Union and Mongolia fought the Japanese troops in North China's Hebei province. Mongolian troops are also in today's parade.
Lao
President Shomali Sanosone with his spouse. Laos fell to Japanese occupation in 1940. Lao people organized guerrilla bands in resistance. The country declared independence in 1945. And also in today's parade, a Lao delegation will be joining other foreign troops to march forward.
We now have Kyrgyz President Almazbek Atambayev. Well, the country of Kyrgyzstan held a parade on May the 9th to mark its Victory Day. Kyrgyzstan is also taking part in today's parade in front of Tiananmen.
Kazakhstan President Nursultan Nazarbayev. Around 500 Kazakhs were granted title Heroes of Soviet Union for their wartime contributions.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. On December the 1st, 1943, after week-long intensive meetings in the capital of Cairo, leaders from the United States, United Kingdom, and China vowed to continue their military action against Japan. And the country also joined today's parade.
President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Joseph Kabila. China and DR Congo have a traditional friendship. China has sent 18 teams of peacekeeping forces there and is highly appreciated by the UN and the nation.
This is Chinese President Xi Jinping and his wife meeting leaders attending the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. We now have Czech President Miloš Zeman and his spouse, Czech, fought hard against fascism during the Second World War. The 7-year German occupation of Czechoslovakia began in 1938. The Nazis annexed the country's northern and western border, known collectively as the Sudetenland. It is estimated about 345,000 casualties were from Czechoslovakia.
King of Cambodia, Norodom Sihamoni. Cambodia was invaded and occupied by Japan from 1941 to 1945, and Cambodia is also taking part in today's parade.
We have Chairman and Presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Dragan Kovic. This year, Bosnia and Herzegovina marks the 20th anniversary of diplomatic ties with China. The Kingdom of Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers. All of Bosnia was ceded to the newly created independent state of Croatia. And Axis rule in Bosnia led to widespread persecution and massive killings of those considered undesirable anti-fascists.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and his son. While over 2 million Belarusian soldiers and civilians died in the Second World War, that was about a quarter of the country's population. In May this year, President Xi visited and met 15 World War II veterans. Belarus is taking part in today's parade.
And of course, we have Russian President Vladimir Putin. Well, Russia was the main European battlefield and China was the main Asian battlefield of the Second World War. The two sides are determined to safeguard the result of the war and maintain world peace and justice. Russian troops are also in today's parade. Well, Russia held its own military parade in May in Moscow's Red Square. President Xi joined other world leaders back then. Now the Forbidden City has witnessed the meeting between President Xi and other state leaders coming to Beijing to attend the commemoration ceremony in the Forbidden City. Now President Xi and heads of foreign delegations and their spouses are heading to the resting area. After a short break, they will take a group photo at the South Square of Duanmen inside Forbidden City.
If you've just joined us, this is our special coverage of the 70th anniversary of the Victory Day of the war against Japanese aggression, as well as the world's anti-fascism war. And in about 30 minutes, China's army will be marching through Tiananmen Square. I will certainly bring you live all the equipment and the servicemen.
Rana, what do you make of this makeup of this international presence at today's military parade? They come from Asia, Africa, America, and Europe.
Yes, it's a very, very wide range, and I think that once again brings to our minds the point that this was an international war, and China was part of an international force in that sense. I think it's also notable that we have, of course, a lot of countries there whose destinies were also shaped by the war and its aftermath. Many parts of the old Soviet Union, who, of course, fought under a Soviet banner in those times. And as someone from Britain myself, I was very pleased to see former Cabinet Minister Kenneth Clarke there representing the UK. It's often forgotten in both countries that Britain and China were allied together in that war. So it's very nice to see a reminder of that this morning.
Senior Colonel, it seems some of our allied countries are present, some are not. What do you make of their choices?
Well, I think we have an extended invitation to many countries, but it's up to them to decide whether they accept our invitation or not. Well, this is a good question, but I think it's them who can really answer this question, why they won't accept the invitation and turn up.
What do you think are their readings of China's commemoration of the Second World War in the form of a military parade? Why do they want to join? Why do they not want to join?
I think it has a lot of things to do with how they read it, because in terms of the contribution made by the Chinese people, there's no doubt about it, and there's no denial of it. But whether China should make such a massive commemoration, and whether China would make use of the past to indicate something in the future, this is some doubt in their mind, and therefore they are somewhat hesitant.
Of course, it is a war between Axis and Allied forces. What is noteworthy is that Japan has not sent its representative to commemorate the 70th anniversary. What do you think, Rana?
I think that there is a problem from the Japanese point of view in terms of the fact that so much of the parade is centered on weaponry and the military. I think had it been purely a commemoration of the past, purely the history, it might have been easier, but I think it's hard for the Japanese government to have one of their representatives seen in a place where the military element is
But
so
they have a
prominent.
troubled record of how to look at history, especially in the Second World War.
Well, I think we shouldn't exaggerate that, though, Zuyue. The fact is that Japan is a liberal society, it's a democratic society. Lots of different viewpoints have been put forward in Japan. And one thing that's worth remembering is that, for instance, some of the worst Japanese war crimes, for instance, the rape of Nanking, in the post-war period, were first exposed by brave left-wing Japanese journalists. So we should remember the Japanese contribution to exposing their own past as well.
What you're now looking at is the commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. This is inside Forbidden City. Chinese President Xi Jinping and guests from around the world are now about to take a group photo at the Duanmen. This is actually the southern entrance of the Forbidden City. And then they will head to Tiananmen. That is the front gate of the Forbidden City, where they will review the troops marching through Tiananmen Square.
太热了，可以到他们还有一个注册
President Xi Jinping and his wife are walking together with foreign dignitaries and heads of international organizations attending today's parade. And this event is both celebratory and ceremonial. Most foreign dignitaries who have visited China, who have visited Beijing, are quite familiar with this ancient architecture. But again, a position on the Tiananmen rostrum to inspect the military is considered a top standard of reception for foreign guests. The last military parade of this scale was in 2009 to mark the 60th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And this is the first time that such a military parade takes place on a date other than October 1st, that's National Day of China.